Virginia Estelle Randolph was a pioneer educator in Henrico County during the 19th and 20th centuries. 2 Henrico public schools have been named in her honor, and the Virginia Randolph Home Economics Cottage memorializes her achievements. In 1976, the museum was named a National Historic Landmark by the United States Department of the Interior. The Virginia Randolph Foundation annually awards scholarships to Henrico students who will be attending a 4-year college or university. Randolph made remarkable strides in African American education during an unsettled time in our history. Her life is a narrative about tolerance, sacrifice, and perseverance.
Miss Randolph was a warrior for what she believed in. Miss Randolph was a warrior for the education of black boys and girls. I can remember her actually calling assemblies. And all of the students would gather in the auditorium, and Miss Randolph would get on the stage, and she would give us a pep talk. You can do it. You can be somebody. Education is your way out. That was the gist of her talk. So I can see her now, standing on the stage or walking into the classroom, and you could hear a pin drop when Miss Randolph was talking, because she was really saying something, you know. And even as kids, we realized that it was wisdom that we should listen to.
Virginia Randolph was born on June 8, 1874, in Richmond, Virginia, soon after the end of the Civil War and the slave emancipation. Virginia was the 3rd child of former slaves Sarah and Edward Randolph. She was educated during the stormy Reconstruction period of the South.
During Reconstruction, immediately after the Civil War, the Freedmen's Bureau had set up schools. Northern philanthropists had come down, particularly women, to help educate the newly freed slaves. And so it was something that was highly sought after. That is when people literally did walk miles and miles to go to school for an education. The schoolrooms were often overcrowded, and the teachers did the best that they could. It was very difficult, but something that was highly sought after to get an education.
At the age of 16, Virginia graduated from the Richmond Colored Normal School, known as Armstrong High School today. She immediately passed the examination designed for teachers interested in rural education, but because of her young age, her uncle had to sign permission for her to become employed. Virginia then began teaching at a school in Goochland County.
For Virginia Randolph to become a teacher so soon after slavery had ended was very unusual. The times were extremely difficult. People were scratching out a living as best they could. Parents wanted their children to be educated, but it was very difficult for them to send one child to school, and that one child that did go would often be charged with educating the other children and parents in the family. So for Virginia Randolph to become a teacher so soon after slavery ended says a great deal about her determination, not only to receive an education for herself, but to improve education, improve the lives of people that came after her.
After 2 years in Goochland County, Randolph secured a teaching position with the Henrico County Public School Board. She opened the Mountain Road School in the north-central part of the county in 1892. It was here, at only 18 years old, that Randolph made many of her noteworthy accomplishments. When she arrived, she found the old Mountain Road School in poor condition, as were many African American schools during the late 19th century. She described the school as bare within and bare without.
In the late 19th century, schools for African Americans were often overcrowded, underfunded. The conditions were very hard. They did not have transportation. The schools were in disrepair. The supplies, the books were practically non-existent. Most of the parents contributed to the school buildings as well as the teachers' salaries. Most of the times they were in churches until a school could be built.
Randolph's primary goal was to improve the grounds of the old Mountain Road School. Using $7.50 from her first month's salary of $25, she purchased gravel for the road leading to the school and received free lawn grass from a member of the community. With these resources, she was able to make the schoolyard more attractive.
Miss Randolph was a stickler for details. Miss Randolph she came straight down the middle. She didn't bend left, she didn't bend right. This is the way it should be, and this is the way it's going to be. Knowing Miss Randolph, I can just imagine that she had the gravel path put to the school so the kids wouldn't have to walk in the mud.
In order to garner the community's interest and involvement, Randolph organized unique activities. Following a proclamation by Governor Claude Swanson, Randolph founded the first Arbor Day program in Virginia. She arranged for one member from 12 different families to plant a tree. As a result, 12 sycamore trees were planted at the school, each named after one of the 12 apostles. Years later, the trees were named the first National Historic Trees in the state of Virginia. They still stand today as a living monument at the Virginia Randolph Museum.
I think it was important for Virginia Randolph to beautify Old Mountain School because appearance really made a difference in how people felt when they entered the building. She wanted the students to want to be there.
I think probably if we had a chance to jump back and talk to Miss Virginia Randolph and ask her, were you trying to change the world? She probably, in her own humble way, would say no, she was trying to change her part of the world. But in doing that, just simply the impact, the combination, permutations of her work tended to spin out in every aspect of education.
Randolph devised innovative ways to involve the community. Her Patrons Improvement League, composed mainly of adult males, whitewashed the school building, and her League of Willing Workers, composed mainly of adult females, raised money for school beautification projects. Randolph also established a Patrons Day to motivate parents to visit the school. All these tactics influenced parents to be active advocates of their children and school.
Miss Randolph motivated everybody that was around her, not only students, not only teachers, but she motivated parents, and she motivated people in the community, and she certainly was an innovator, because she had to be an innovator to be able to do what she did with the little she had.
Virginia Randolph has been quoted as saying, "The education a child gets out of a book isn't going to do him much good if he doesn't know how to use his hands." Her approach to vocational and industrial instruction was dynamic. Randolph introduced simple forms of vocational and agricultural work to her curriculum. Boys were taught to use tools and girls were taught to cook. Parents did not always accept her ideas, and many became irate, insisting their children learn from books rather than manual labor.
Virginia Randolph met a great deal of resistance because she very much believed that students needed to know the practical skills, much like Booker T. Washington. But then there were others who felt that their children needed to learn the academics, the intellectual subjects, and that they wanted to move them away from what they had thought of as those areas where enslaved people had been working in the fields, working in the kitchens and the homes. But Virginia Randolph felt that they needed to be able to take care of their own homes, and that's why it was imperative that they learn how to do this, and she wanted to be sure that they knew how to do it.
I have on the desk a quote from Gardner that says, "A competent plumber is infinitely more valuable than an incompetent philosopher." I'm not sure that a competent plumber isn't more valuable than a competent philosopher. But again, Miss Randolph knew the value of that.
The 16 years that Virginia Randolph taught at the Old Mountain Road School saw conflict and disappointment, as well as success. A group of vocal parents prepared and submitted a petition that demanded Randolph's removal. After the county superintendent ignored the petition, many parents tried to keep their children from attending the school. According to Randolph, the children ignored their parents' wishes and still tried to attend classes. Undeterred, Randolph continued searching for new educational ideas, even visiting white schools to examine their teaching methods.
When people learned of the kinds of work that she was doing, she did receive a great deal of support, particularly because white Virginians wanted to see African Americans in these industrial roles. Someone who would have to do that work, and they felt that she was training them to do that work. She herself felt that not only was she training them to do that work, but to exceed that work and go on to better things.
While I don't want to impose upon her motives that I have no way of detecting, she probably did this in a way that only could be done in that period of time. Because let's say that she had announced that she was going to develop a program that would enhance the academic abilities of African American young people. She would have had to fight another war. Instead, she used what we now know to be good practice, the teaching of practical skills, as a vehicle through which young people came to understand English, math, science, and history. It was, for her, probably good common sense, but for the rest of us, it was way ahead of its time.
Where some people thought of Booker T. Washington as an Uncle Tom, they would think of Virginia Randolph as an Aunt Jemima, always catering to whites, kowtowing to them, seeking out their support. But Booker T. Washington, as well as Virginia Randolph, understood how to work the system, understood where they could get support, and were willing to do what they could to get that support.
Virginia Randolph's efforts were recognized in 1905 when Dr. Jackson Davis, Henrico County's school superintendent, visited the Old Mountain Road School. He said of Randolph, "Here was a teacher who thought of her work in terms of the welfare of the whole community and had the school as an agency to help people to live better." Dr. Davis was so impressed with Randolph's work that he arranged for her to visit other rural Henrico schools 1 or 2 days a week. He wanted Randolph to share her ideas on education and show the teachers how to use their hands and organize their work. However, the other teachers became jealous, insubordinate, and critical of Randolph, many perceiving they were being shown like children how to perform their jobs. Dr. Davis recognized the conflicts and proposed the title of full-time industrial supervisor for Randolph. The board denied his recommendation, forcing Dr. Davis to seek other funding for this newly created position.
She believed very strongly in doing her level best, and she encouraged others to do as well. And so she was meticulous. She would look at every detail, very critical, but the way that she was critical was meant to be helpful. Those who were uncomfortable with her would feel that she was criticizing them in a negative way. And that's where you got a lot of the jealousy, the negative feelings toward her.
A supervisory role probably doesn't mean the same thing as a supervisor today. It's not someone who has a ton of people with a span of control. A supervisor then was someone who was a specialist who could help to plant these seeds of curriculum, enable people to teach in that mode, and to help to hold them accountable. The superintendent's role dominantly in providing leadership is to find out what people need and then to rally those who can do it and provide the resources for them.
Jackson Davis occupied an important position in a complex relationship that included Southern whites, Northern philanthropists, and African Americans. Davis believed that in order to obtain the cooperation of the African American community, they must feel some degree of ownership in their schools. Virginia Randolph would become Dr. Davis's champion of reform for this very cause.
The Northern philanthropist helped the black schools because many of them had been familiar through the abolitionist movement earlier in America's history of what had gone on in the South. And then you had the Quakers, who were very involved because they believed in equality.
Anna T. Jeans, a Philadelphia Quaker, became the sole survivor in her family and inherited the family's fortune. In 1907, just before her death, she set aside $1 million to foster education in African American rural schools. Dr. Jackson Davis appealed to Jeans Fund president, James Dillard, for aid to pay the salary of an industrial supervisor who would be employed under what he called the Henrico Plan. This plan relied upon an industrial supervisor to improve every rural African American school by implementing the methods already established by Virginia Randolph. Dr. Davis believed that academic studies coupled with vocational education would play a vital role in enhancing the entire community. Impressed by Dr. Davis's request, Dr. Dillard granted the funds for a salary of $40 a month, enabling Virginia Randolph to become the first Jeans supervisor.
I think they wanted to put Henrico on the map. They wanted this Henrico Plan to be the model for rural education. And they wanted to really lead this effort in bringing the practical as well as the academic together. Virginia Randolph was very much a country woman. She supported the rural schools. She believed strongly in rural education. She herself had not received advanced training, but she was committed to teaching from the heart. She wanted those children to succeed, not only in their communities, but in life in general. And she just put her all into it. And sometimes that means more than all the advanced degrees in the world.
Ms. Randolph went all over teaching teachers to teach. And I read an article where many times, she had a horse and buggy. She had to pay somebody to drive her around, and then finally she got her own horse. She went to other counties. She went all over. She went all up Powhatan, Goochland, everywhere, teaching teachers how to teach. Horse and buggy. And I read in an article where it said, the old roads were dirt and gravel during that day.
That's not Cadillacs driving. That's difficult driving there. And usually she was alone. And you didn't really find too many women who were traveling alone at that time as well. So she was stepping out of her place as a lady in that regard, but she was still working within the sphere of domesticity in that she was an educator. She would disassemble her own stove after she cooked her breakfast, after the stove had cooled down, so that she could bring it to school, and she would put it on a buggy to make sure that the girls, the female students, would learn how to cook. And that tells you a great deal about her own determination to teach the practical skills.
To do what she did, you have to have the heart of a lamb but the skin of an armadillo, because I am sure that she took her shots.
Racism was extremely blatant late 19th, early 20th century. African Americans were migrating from the South to the North, seeking better conditions because the South was just virulent with racism. The environment that Virginia Randolph was in was extremely difficult, but she was one of those who felt that her field of work was right here within the rural communities. And so she decided to stay and really make a difference. Though it was supposed to be separate and equal, things were very much unequal. And that goes to everything: schools, libraries, restaurants, everything was separate and very much unequal.
You know, it was those type teachers who really care about the students, who really encouraged the students, and did an awful lot to make sure that you grew up the proper and the right way, even though we didn't have everything, but we had the principles. The principles were there. Now, I thought that was very, very important.
Everybody was okay as long as you were in your place. And your place is what people perceived you to be through their eyes of bias or bigotry. Miss Virginia Randolph, I'm sure, was a lady who offered respect and who received respect. But there were some who gave her that respect because she was okay as long as she was in her place. What they didn't know is that her place was bigger than they ever understood it to be.
The Henrico Plan was a success. James Dillard visited Henrico County to witness Virginia Randolph's progress, and he was deeply impressed. Dr. Dillard referred to Davis and Randolph as the inventors of the Real Genes Plan. Virginia Randolph had a simple approach to education that centered on parent and community involvement, academic and industrial training, and attractive environments. As the overseer of 23 elementary schools in Henrico, Randolph developed the first in-service training program for Black teachers. Her innovative self-help programs have transcended time and are still found in our schools today.
This was a lady who saw beyond her time. She was able to project impact into the future without foregoing the labor that it took on a day-to-day basis to make it happen. You have to develop something at the local level that works before it has a national impact. And I think the foundation certainly saw in her not only someone who could practically bring this to reality, but who was an evangelist for technical education, which we call technical now, before that vocational, before that industrial, but teaching the trades. She apparently brought all of that together and again made a far bigger impact nationally than most people even consider locally.
She is an international figure. In fact, there were quite a few colonies in Africa that took up this Henrico Plan that Virginia Randolph really implemented, working with your hands as well as your head.
Randolph was appointed to the Industrial School Board of Colored Children after the death of noted Richmonder Maggie Walker. In 1949, Randolph retired after a decorated 57-year career with Henrico County Public Schools. She never married, but although not biological, she had many children.
When I finished the first grade, I went to live with her. Well, to me, she was, and number one, she was a mother to me. Number two, everybody that I have talked to have said nothing but good things about her. One of the twins that she raised, Pearl, she and I both counted the children that have lived in her home, and we counted up to 87 to take care of all the children that came underneath her guidance. She really did a good job, including myself, because I don't think that I would have been where I be quiet. I don't think I would have finished school or anything else if it hadn't been for her.
I remember Miss Randolph as a champion for education. A champion for education, and in that day, African Americans, because, you know, that's what she dealt with. But if Miss Randolph lived today, she would be a champion, not for African Americans. She would be a champion for education.
It is important that we know who she is, particularly for people in the area, not only Henrico, but the surrounding area, as well as Virginia and beyond, because she really changed the way we think about rural education.
I've always seen someone who was humble and hardworking with a big heart. It's amazing that when you look at her in retrospect, she can get bigger than life. But I think she's also the kind of person that most of us would like to have had for a neighbor.
She really did an great job for my generation. She really did. I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for Miss Virginia Randolph. And a lot of people think that way too. She was just great. She was just great. I will always respect that lady.
Virginia Estelle Randolph died in Richmond on March 16, 1958, at the age of 84. A devout Christian woman of principle and character, her legacy endures.